Snap.
Hi, good evening, Michael Can. This is Anurag, and we are here again at our usual time to discuss episodes 22 and 23 this time
Uh,
of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis by John Vervaeke. And the topics will include today um, Romanticism and Hegel. We have the
I
two
think 23 and 24, and
23, 21, 22 we covered last time. This is 23, 24.
yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you. I
yeah.
stand corrected. Okay, so this was interesting. We are working our way through the history, and I was couldn't wait, but I peeked ahead, and I think the Cogsci stuff starts in 26 or something, right? Very soon we
Yeah.
get to his own work, and I'm eager to plow through the next 4 to 6 and get to that. But I think this is a necessary foundation for those. So I think we need to go through this to prepare ourselves for jumping into the deep end of Vervaeke's own thinking. So let's see. So Romanticism. I'll open the floor as always and see which of you want to tee up the episode 23.
So the most
Uh,
powerful metaphor that, well, I the most powerful metaphor that I experienced out of 23 was the two different schools of thought. One being that the mind is a blank slate that is taking in sense perception, the impact of the senses, and is being written on
Yeah,
or painted on by reality. And then the other school of thought, which is no, it's the other way around. You don't ever encounter what's out there. It's unintelligible, and the mind is painting onto that essentially blank canvas out there. You're projecting onto it, and Vervaeke says they're both wrong.
yeah.
That's how I would, if I get my way, that's how I would tee up the discussion this evening, is around that metaphor.
Yeah.
now, did he was? Let me make sure I'm on the same page here because I remember that part. But didn't he illustrate that by saying that you had the rationalists, the Cartesian ultra rational, and then you had the reaction to that. There's a romantic movement, which was this kind of hyper emotional, ungrounded spasm of indulgence and feelings is the only thing that matters. Is that what you guys heard from that part
Yeah.
as well? Yeah. Um, yes, I think that you're right, Cam, about that framing. I mean, I
Okay.
think that's what he was basically talking about the whole time.
I,
Um,
I saw this as a build-up from the previous one where the split between mind and matter continues to go deeper, with someone like Descartes saying, it's all in the mind, and Kant also then coming back and saying it's all in the mind. And for you to understand, you have to really go deep, and the mind will impose reason to make sense of the world. Well, that's how I took it.
but I also think it's very interesting when they're talking about math. He's talking about math a lot here,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And how the Cartesians' view is that math is reality, right? But then we have Kant inserted into was that later? Is that where
yeah,
we
yeah,
go into,
yeah, yeah.
right?
You're right. You're right.
Because he's like, yeah, that's not how it works, um, at all. But I think that part of kind of the overview for me about this is he's showing this sort of train wreck unfolding, right? This is, I think, what this last two episodes are really
Yeah,
about is
yeah,
is
yeah,
is we're seeing the train wreck of when you no longer have a grounding in certain methods of transformation that include connection to the world in certain ways, your body and processes that you share with others, then all you have is propositional statements that aren't grounded in anything and that don't have a process attached to them. And I think this is where the train wreck is really coming off the rails, right? The train is coming off the rails here. Because what you're doing is you're spinning around in a self-proclaimed universe that doesn't connect. Is that you guys? Is that yeah? Okay.
So it's becoming either too abstract or completely untethered from reason, like a romanticism view being it's all intrinsic intuition, and ultimately Nietzsche even going so far as to say will to power.
Yeah, right.
You can impose your will on the world, and that's how you structure the world, and reason doesn't play a role in it.
I mean, I mean, I have to say, reading these two really struck home for me because I can really relate to what he says about the romantic comedies being these absolute absurd fantasy worlds of that are really disconnected from anything real or helpful, I guess, is kind of what he's saying. I think he said they're all bullshit, which I think is true. And then it sets a model that people to follow that they're just going to fall off a cliff if they follow that because it's not grounded in anything really useful, I guess is a good word to put it. And also what I also got from this is he's showing this, in his opinion at least, the seeds that were planted into the most, destructive ideological sort of ways of thinking that now are absolutely blossoming all over the place in our world. I mean, as I reading it, I was just kept thinking about all these things I read and I'm seeing in the world now and things that people are believing. And I'm like, before it's like, how did they get there? And now, well, here we go. I mean, this is at least one version of how we got here, is that untethering from certain important structures of how you sort experience and how you transform how you relate being completely off the rails, and there's no system that's universal or even semi-universal to sort those things out. And I think that's what we're really looking at here.
And again, I think in this episode, he also brings up that the logical endpoint of this, even if you apply reason, but you decouple it and say reason is simply material understanding of the world, and there's nothing transcendent about it. And even if you keep understanding the world through reason, rationality, at some point you can't get to values at all. And he actually brings up Richard Dawkins as an example of an atheist, modern atheist, who is obviously very scientific minded, very grounded, very rational in that sense of the word, but cannot get off the ground beyond that to talk about what it means to have transcendent experiences. That I thought was an interesting pointer of how far the modern view has gone, the materialist view has gone.
Yeah, I agree. And now there was part of this, I was wondering if you guys, see if I can find it, that was hard for me to fully understand the structure that Vervaeke was putting forth. And I think it was Kant. Yeah. So about how we sort out data and then categorize it in a certain way. And he was using lines and in the box and all that stuff. I'm not sure I understand what he was trying to get at exactly. I thought I maybe, but sometimes Vervaeke has a way of explaining things that is not super accessible to me. Let's see, where it is here. Let me see if I can find it. But oh yeah, so the new Kantian understanding of grammar of how the mind operates. That's what he was talking about. So oh, yeah, okay. So my mind is filtering and imposing a structure. So this is part of his discussion about, I guess this is discussing in more detail, maybe the two sides of that Cam started us off on, right?
That's right. You're right.
Okay. But he said that part of the structure is how most neuroscientists actually still agree with what Kant said about how things are sorted. And one thing I'm having a hard time with is that because I'm having a hard time relating to exactly how he structured it, I'm kind of defaulting to other things I've read recently
Yeah,
about that.
me
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, I agree. I agree.
So it might be, I feel, I feel the pain too, Michael. He's doing such a meticulous job, and he says several times, he's like, I'm having to cut through. Like we got an hour to talk about Khan, and I'm
Yeah.
having to cut through a whole bunch of stuff. It's too much. I don't think it's for me anyway. I'm happy to play however you guys want, but I am inclined to just go right at the issue as we understand it amongst ourselves, and then go back and listen to our own dialogue. Like I'll go back and listen to it when I can reflect on our own articulation of how we think we experience that correspondence, or however you want to. Like I said, that if you guys want to do a different metaphor, I'm open, but the
Yeah,
two
me too. Me too.
canvases seems like
Yeah,
a workable metaphor, and just simply talk about, I would define a few terms amongst ourselves, never mind what Vervaeke says for the time being, and
Fair
then come
enough.
back
Yeah.
and see how our dialogue lines up with his text and his way of pointing it out, and see if we can make any better sense out of
yeah,
it. What do you
yeah.
think of that?
You
Yeah, no,
introduce the
I
frame,
agree.
go for it.
Yeah,
So
that.
though I would love to start with this term that he uses, which is, and define it for ourselves, intelligibility. What does that mean to you guys? He uses it quite a bit.
Hmm. Okay, can you give us some examples of how he uses it? Because I kind of halfway remember what him using that.
Let me just do a quick word search here, and I'll find a. I think about it as the world seems intelligible.
Hmm.
Like you
Hmm.
guys, this seems like an intelligible phenomenon occurring here before me that I'm participating in. Oh, what does that mean that it's intelligible? That's the question. If you were to try to tell me,
Well, I mean, I think that well, I'm just going to speak from what my reaction is to that, is that there is an infinite number of facts before us. And so in some ways, I mean, in one hand, you can't make sense of the whole of existence. You have to choose certain things to orient towards and focus on, which excludes others. I think that's part of why you can't really perceive the whole of existence all at once, or I mean, you're never going to be able to because there's just too much. So you have to choose a kind of an orientation about how to sort and categorize and orient yourself to what you're experiencing, right?
so this is a rhetorical question. Is you said a choice. You have to make a choice. And I don't feel like I'm making a whole lot of conscious choices.
Well, there's no, I think, well, I'd say your subconscious does that
Okay.
mostly, right? Mostly it's your subconscious doing that.
Which
The
is,
bottom up. So he talks about bottom up, top down, right? So bottom up means your body, your subconscious orienting, making decisions, processing a massive amount of data, and then making decisions for you mostly about how to orient, about what that so whatever what's happening around you is processed by your body, and it makes decisions, it's very quickly about how to orient your physiology and therefore your psychology towards those perceived, that interpreted data. I'll put it that way. So the nervous system has an interpretive schema that it uses, that you're mostly unaware of because you can't look into the black box. It's happening. So all you can really see is the results of its decisions in your physiology and the orientation. Now, I'm not speaking from Vervaeke directly here. I'm talking about the neuroscience I've been studying in the last 7 years. So, and Peterson talks about this too. He says, we have to create an interpretive schema so that we can know what to aim at, right? Because if you don't have an aim, you can't move forward towards anything.
you look
Um,
like you wanted to say something, Anya. Anurag. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, you
Yes, I
froze.
was trying to bring this intelligibility question back to the frame of the chapter 27, episode
Oh,
22.
please do. Yeah, if you can
And
do that, I'd
the
be
way I
grateful.
took intelligibility to mean, if you look at Kantian view of intelligibility, how do you make sense? What's intelligible? The framework was, look, math is really good at describing the world. We can make predictions with math and calculations and all that. But his take is it's intelligible only because we live in our head and our mind is primary and the math is in the head.
Oh, right.
Math has
Thank you. That's
properties
right.
of the head, the categorical, right? So because math has properties of the head, when I make sense of the world, what I'm doing is applying reason, but not to the world outside, which is inaccessible. I'm just channeling Kant per Vervaeke. Like not uh, um, because my mind is inaccessible, reality is inaccessible to my mind, but I make sense of it because my mind already has mathematical structures, mathematics embedded in it.
Mhm.
And therefore, when I apply reason, I'm not applying reason to the world out there. I'm applying reason to my mind in here. And that's revealing to me some logic. That's revealing to me some structure. So it's all a head game, according to Kant, right? Because the outside reality is not directly knowable. And the reason or rationality is limited to what I can think my way through. And therefore, I'm applying my reasoning or intelligibility to what he calls frames and filters. These are inside your head. And the frames and filters in my head is what gives me intelligibility, what makes me have sense of the world. That's Kant's view. And then
That's
the
Kant's view.
opposite side, the romantic view is that, you know, the opposite view was, no, it's the world is like empirical and then romantic, two separate. Empirical view was Locke and others that the world is as it is, and we apply reason to it
Right.
as propositional knowledge, nothing else, just material propositional knowledge. So on a blank slate of world, we apply the objective truths by applying reason and generating propositions, and that helps us make sense of the world, which is the opposite that the reason is to be applied to the world out there, but as an abstract, right? Romanticism comes up and says, you know, we can, which is a variation of Kant, according to Vervaeke, because he says, oh, Kant says, it's all in the head. Romantic notion is you can get more in touch with the world by intuiting, by going deeper into the layers of the mind. So to me, what was a really interesting one was the unlock was, this is Vervaeke saying epistemology, the way of thinking of Kant, plus the Gnostics is what
Right.
epistemology of almost Carl Jung is.
That's
Which
amazing,
is like
actually.
you have to go inside your mind, figure out the layers of mind, and Gnostics are about spiritual uplifting by understanding the powers. So it's very interesting. He thinks that you have to understand Kant and Gnostics together to start making sense of where Jung is coming from, which is a head game. But he obviously doesn't talk about Jung right now. But it's still like this is where he parks it in this episode, right? And then he sets up saying, look, these two models, the one of saying I'm imposing my wish on the world through my mind, and it's all in the mind, or I'm imposing it externally, but I'm still intuiting it from like empirically. I'm don't have anything to aspire to. Empiricist view versus romantic/Kantian view are the two opposing schemas he's saying. And he's saying both of those we leave this idea of transcendence in a wrong way, and rationality doesn't play the right role. He doesn't solve for it by saying what's the right way, but he says these are limited for these reasons.
So both
He
are limited,
uses
right?
Nietzsche as an example of why, if you try to bridge all of this crap, you come up with this idea that You just need to have will to exert on the world, and the world will bend to what you want.
I see. So that was so he showed those contrasting mistakes, Kant and
Romantic.
Cartesian view, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then
Cartesian
that
slash empiricist view, which is the outcome of that.
and
Right?
that's where we segue into episode 20 or lecture 24, which is the Nietzsche and Hegel both
Yes.
really wrecking the train because they make will to power means that you can just impose your will onto reality because it's all the reality comes from your mind anyway or something like that, right? It's all a
Yeah,
construct, right?
yeah, yeah.
So that's postmodernism's seed. And then Hegel, I think he was saying that Hegel tried to unify things, but none of it connected to any sort of process beyond your mind. Did I get that right? And so you're trapped within your own mind, even though he's attempting to unify. It doesn't work because there's no grounding. There's no participatory knowing. And what was the other thing? There was two procedural knowing involved. So that's all left out. So we have these train wrecks coming because of that lack of connection to the whole
Yeah.
process of transformation, right?
Exactly.
Oh,
What's
okay.
interesting to me is by the time he gets to Hegel and Nietzsche and Hegel, we can set up Hegel. Like either one of you wants to set up the Hegel episode because he goes pretty deep into Hegel.
It was hard for me because again, there's so much detail that I know he's rushing through the detail. It was kind of hard for me to grasp all of it.
It feels like he's demonstrating the process of reciprocal narrowing in
Hmm.
the Western civilization thought, where there's this, he goes through the series of deaths that are increasingly isolating the individual from those perspectival, procedural, participatory ways of knowing. Like it's killing off, he uses that term sapiential, which I don't really understand very well. Like those communities. There's two sections in the first part of the first episode that we went through here. What is it, 23 or
23? Yeah.
Where he goes, the headers in the transcript read why a return to a traditionally religious is not viable, and then that's immediately followed by why a secular approach is not viable either. So he's showing essentially as the as that probably left hemispherically mediated way of
I would
understanding reality continues, progresses in its predominance. It reaches like that critical point, right? And erupts into world war. The consequence is world war, mechanized war on a global scale. So in Hegel, it felt like in the last part of that episode, he was showing how that relentless walk of the rational thought process, untethered from a transcendental experience, um, walks into that essentially. Hegel lays out he basically sets Nietzsche up. It feels like he gives Nietzsche the pieces that allows Nietzsche to take his run at it. And I think it was Hegel. I didn't understand. I thought it was Nietzsche that said it, but I think I understood in that episode about Hegel. He says Hegel's the one that said we need a new mythology, and it's going to be the last and final stage.
And and not Nietzsche, but it's interesting that the Hegel chapter, I'm just going through my notes, is where he calls it the last utopia, the last attempt at religion, right? The last religion called utopia. And he actually has a chart side by side of how mythological understanding of religion, going from father, son, the incarnation, to Son, Father, the reconciliation, to Holy Spirit, agape and God. He draws that. And then he compares it to philosophy of reason, where Hegel is trying to create a new version of that mythology with reason as its center. And he says undifferentiated world, then it becomes differentiated, and and then it gets reintegrated, and a new identity emerges out of that. And that spirit of the whole thing, he calls it Geist, is how self-awareness emerges. So it's actually very quote unquote spiritual, or at least mathological attempt at recreating alternate structure, because religions lost because of the scientific revolution. And Hegel is trying to attempt to place reason at the center of this process of what he
Oh,
calls, dialectic, like how the dialectic works, and how thesis, antithesis, both differentiate and integrate, and something emerges out of it. So it's a very biological sounding process of growth. And he still brings back some idea of God or Geist, and he still brings back the idea of, secularized version of like a higher being. So it's very interesting that he is doing something which is different than everybody else before, Hegel is. Um, and he's trying to do what he called the grand synthesis of everything to reconcile and create a new religion. And then
and
I'll pause right here, because then he says Hegel turns out to be the godfather of all the totalitarian ideologies. And then
right.
he counters his own explanation of Hegel by saying how, Schopenhauer, Marx, Kierkegaard, all of them came later and basically not only were critics of Hegel, but basically dismantled and resulted in complete totalitarian ideologies of various flavors. That's how I took away from my notes.
So that I want to kind of trace this so I understand it, or understand the presentation of it. So how exactly did Hegel sow the seeds of totalitarianism in the way that he did this? This is my question.
So
Uh,
let me, if you don't mind, I can read from my notes that might
yeah,
set it.
please.
These are notes I took. Um, so first, he's trying to say that what's emerging is internal complexification of the world. And he calls this Geist as the internal development where idea, counter idea, thesis, antithesis increases the complexification of the world we live in. And it is an ever-growing loop, spiral loop. And his philosophy has a God, a purpose. And he's saying that the history is moving towards this purpose. So before Marx, he's the first one saying history is moving in a particular direction, a positive telos of history that is going to reach towards idealism. This process is going to result in some ideal utopia.
Oh, that's what Hegel thought.
Yes. And that's
Oh,
why he's
wow.
saying this
Okay.
process
I
is going to
see.
develop in a way that it will reveal a ever higher complexified God, or what he called the purpose. And the process is going to be powered by understanding and moving from understanding to rationality of reason. And he's using principles of living systems to make sense. And he's talking about this mythology that comes with it. The only trick is that for it to work, you have to believe that this process can be controlled, mastered, and implemented. The utopia can be achieved.
Yeah.
This process can be guided. And that's kind of the problem of when people start saying, okay, if Hegel wants to reach this telos of ever improved complexification, how are we going to get there? And Nietzsche and Schopenhauer were saying will to power. Few people, the Superman,
I
who know
see.
better than the masses, we know better, we will will ourselves into an ideal state.
Oh, so and then what's missing is the components of transformation. It's like he's halfway
Halfway.
there, Hegel, right? But he's missing parts. This is
Yeah.
so funny. It's really, it kind of makes me understand. So one of the things that Peterson says, he goes, ideologies are religions that are like missing limbs.
Yes.
So
So,
this is what he's talking about.
so there are three critics of Hegel, which each of them spawned their own totalitarian ideology. But he says Hegel came out and said, sorry, Hegel's critics Nietzsche and Schopenhauer said, okay, to achieve this wonderful utopia, the new religion that we are all aspiring for, will to power is like the iron fist to get there. And
Yep.
Kierkegaard said that all beliefs are completely nihilistic, right? There's no perceptual participatory knowledge. There's no path to agape or personal transcendence, according to
Mhm.
Kierkegaard. And therefore, even if you get to these truths, they're not going to change anything. So that's a dead end. Like literally, that's a utopian dead end. And the Marx says, okay, I understand history is being driven by economic necessity, not reason. So he substitutes from reason to economic necessity. And now he says, okay, religious is a utopia, like a opium for the masses. So now we know, and now the my version of rationality is going to drive the historical imperative, the utopia that is ready to be made. That's the Marxist view of totalitarianism. So basically, all of these variations of attempt at religion in the new world of materialism, the split between materialism and idealism, result in some scientifically, quote unquote, huge quotes, scientifically defended view of rationality in which all power is given to some people to impose a higher order utopia as if you're trying to reach God.
And this is incredible because the model that he talks about of transformation from the past was participatory in the community. So there wasn't an overreaching person dictating. It was a
Hegel's
group
view.
effort,
That's the Hegel's
right?
view, right?
Yeah, interesting.
And in the final part of this episode, I think the summary is that Marx is completing Hegel's work by offering a method of participating through call to arms,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
To have a socioeconomic revolution simply by brute force of will to power to achieve a secular utopia, not a religious one,
Oh.
and claiming that this is going to be the end of history.
Oh, wow, yeah, it didn't work out too well, did it?
I know. I know. And
Wow.
particularly it doesn't help you with the meaning making either, because if now you are ideologues who are trying to make meaning by this project of achieving what history is intended to achieve.
Well, and also he talks about, I mean, there's something else that he talks about that I've heard elsewhere as well, which is that when there isn't a grounding in the process of transformation, the words are hollow, right? And it's an interesting thing that I've noticed this when I listen to people who are ideological, they say words and I can't understand anything they're saying. It's like there's this it's almost like it's just rah, 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 because there's nothing behind it. They're just parroting a structure that has no experiential or participatory grounding in their own experience. They're not, it's like it's dead words. That's one way I heard it stated. Empty dead words. And that's exactly what I heard, I understand happened during like the communist revolution in Russia.
I also think that the utopia of, like he talked about Marxist and then communist, utopia becomes so strong. You are so strongly believe in the telos or the utopia that the end point, that the imperative and what needs to happen, you so strongly believe in the utopian outcome and the ideal that to you because no longer agape is no longer a choice, personal
Mm-hmm.
transformation is no longer a choice, humility and reflection on the limits of what you can do with your own self is no longer contested. So what's happened is that all the rationality becomes just a weapon to be deployed for achieving a utopian ideal, right? So
God, it's so, totally. I mean,
that's why I think today's ideologues with
wow.
Marxist historical frameworks are so clear about their conviction in the outcome
Yep.
that will to power is all they are expressing. All tactics are valid. It's all will to power.
Well, this is amazing. I'm really grateful that you've done a more thorough job of studying this than I have, so I'm grateful for that. Um, some of the reflections of what you've just said, I see in certain institutions in the world, the medical industry, for example. There's the same essence there where they say we have this rational approach to health that cannot be contradicted because we have the data. And it's like, meanwhile, the country's falling apart. People's health is worse than it's ever been. But they can't be contradicted. And I'm like, come on, it's like, the emperor has no clothes here, but you guys keep insisting that he does. And that's just one example. And then, of course, you have the Marxist, the what do you call it, postmodernists as well, with the same sort of idiocy. And then the other thing I'm seeing in the world now, and just talk about America, for example, how there's this belief in a certain perspective, I'll just politically, for example, that justifies breaking any possible rule that been laid down before or law, because the crisis is so great that we know the truth, that we're going to step over every law that exists in service of our superior knowledge of the truth. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of, have you read the book True Believers, Eric Hoffman?
Yeah, 3 times. I love that book.
Eric Hoffman.
Yeah, have you read that, Cam?
No.
Oh God, that should
slim
be read.
volume.
Everyone should read that in high school. That is just such an incredible book.
It's about the mindset of the true believers and across all ideologies. And I think that popped in my mind as you were describing the mindset.
Yeah, but also the thing that I think is most profound about what this structure, that Vervaeke is putting forth is that, and Hoffer talks about it, is that it's actually anti-rational. So there's all this claim to rationality, but rationality has nothing to do with it. What Hoffer says is that absolute certainty by the leader of the movement is the most important thing, because people aren't looking for facts or rationality. They're looking for something certain to aim at that proves they're virtuous, something like that.
Can your thoughts, reactions?
Well, thanks a lot, you guys, for putting all that out there. As you were talking, it was reminding me, I think I'm gonna do a poor job of this right now, but I think what I understood with respect to Hegel was that in the there's this will, he said, before it got to will to power, it was Schopenhauer, I think, that said there were the 2 boxes. He says, okay, you got the rational sitting on top and you have the irrational sitting underneath it. And that irrational is associated with an arbitrary will to live.
Yeah, that's correct.
And
yeah,
that's
yeah.
really what's running the show. And I think Hegel took that the next step, probably more than one. But what I think Hegel did was said, okay, well, how do we understand this unfolding of an arbitrary will to live? And I think I heard him say it's through the process of studying history. So being able, noticing the patterns across iterations across history as to what if that's running the show, can we recognize the pattern? And maybe it was his assertion to say, okay, I think we got it now. We can see enough of that. We can see enough history. And this is the final step of the rational coming back over the top for the last time and moving into the promised land. And we can actually get there, everybody.
Mythology of reason. He creates that. Hegel does.
Mythology of reason, is that what it is?
mythology of reason, according to Hegel, or at least according to Vervaeke, describing what Hegel is attempting to do.
What is the word? Mythology?
Mythology of reason.
What's mythology?
Mythology.
Mythology. Myth.
Oh, mythology. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, mythology.
Yeah, no, that's just,
Whatever.
I thought it was, there's so many words in this series
No,
that I don't
like
have to look up, you know, like even sapiential, which I've looked up 3 times and I still can't remember what it means.
So mythology of
Doesn't
reason.
it just mean amongst humans?
I think so, but I'm not sure.
Making sense of it is what I took away.
Is that right?
I don't know.
So mythology. Okay, so that's helpful. No, Cam, that was a good thing you pointed out. The history being the frame,
the way to understand.
Yeah.
Of
course, you know, the thing that really, well, as I was reading this and as we're talking, I'm like, you know, I always wonder this. You know, what am I missing, or what structures do I not have solid within my own orientation that is, you know, leading to my own ruin, you know, as I live my life, right? And especially as Vervaeke's, you know, when he was talking about, you have to have a structure. So you have psychotechnology nested in a ritual, nested in a community. And I keep thinking about that, going, you know, I hope that I'm going at least in that grain of direction in my life. But I've never really had that. That's the thing that really struck me when I read it. I'm like, Jesus, no wonder I've struggled so much in my life, despite, you know, there was other problems in my beginnings, which were awful. But on top of that, I don't think I've ever truly seen that structure in action in any coherent form in my life. But he
so
describes.
does it seem to you that that is what we are restoring right here, right?
Absolutely. That's why when I went to the workshop last summer, I was like, you know, when I heard that it's a discussion between Rafe and Peterson, and what Rafe talked about he was doing, I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for. And I do believe that's what we're doing. And did you guys get the email about how Evolved Move Play has weekly meetings on Wednesday morning?
Yeah, I haven't been able to make the Wednesday morning ones. They've got a couple new formats going. I've been able to make a couple evening calls now for 2 or 3 weeks.
Did you do the one with Kyle? Is that the one that you went to, or?
I've done 2 with Kyle now.
Yeah, I think I may restructure my schedule so I can do the Tuesday evening, because the morning is just the wrong time. I mean, if it was at 8 or something, maybe, but it's like it's just too late.
Yeah, it's in prime time. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
But I'm really
they're having a hard time because it's a global community. So they got
I
it, like
see.
there's gonna be a bad time for somebody.
For somebody.
You cannot escape the tyranny of the time zone.
That is, well, you know, I guess that, you know, maybe, by the way, I think they're doing this because I suggested it to Kyle. He actually talked to me about marketing and all this. I said, Kyle,
Good.
you got to keep people in the loop, because everyone just drifts away. I mean, because we don't have a structure. And so I think that's why it's happening. But I think maybe I'll talk to him more, because I'm in communication. I'm going to say, I think you need to try to create time zone specific times, and instead of trying to please everyone, and then do your best to have them for different time zones somehow.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, because
as I'm listening to you say that, I'm thinking about that principle of subsidiarity. So here we go. Here come the little chapters, the time zone specific chapters, and then you're going to have a delegate from those, the guy that's not working in the corporate world out of the group, that joins the 9 a.m. Wednesday thing.
That's right. Exactly.
Funny.
In case you end up going, it'll be helpful. And more importantly, if some of these are recorded, I would be happy to join. But I want to have somebody else vet it before I invest time. That's my sadly selfish view here.
Well, I'd be glad to do it if I could. I mean, I was going to try to make it this yesterday, but I was going to just do it for an hour, but I was like, God, this is when I get to work, and I have to handle all these things. It's like, it's just not going to work. The Tuesday evening might work. That's at 6, I think.
So
So that,
coming back to the
yeah.
topic,
Anyway, yeah.
I had an interesting observation just listening to the fact that empiricists who have done a fantastic job actually of building up the science in the last 300-400
Yeah.
years, and stems from the Lockean view that reality is out there and we can apply reason to start having better understanding of the phenomena out there and the error correction, etc. But they have relegated the question of consciousness and transcendence and meaning. And the dead end of that, perhaps, is Richard Dawkins, where,
Absolutely.
right, where, by the way, I've read everything he's written, and I am a huge admirer of his work and his defense of many rational practices and so forth, etc. But I've also observed that his best work, when he tries to, his weakest work, when he tries to bring transcendence to his work and says, okay, it comes down to what he calls, the sense of wonder by looking at the universe and sense of uniqueness that we are here for a short period of time. So he's pointing to the sense of wonder and awe in the scientific worldview of how humans are so precious and rare. And he's using that as kind of the what to aspire for if we are going to have a shared view of humanity and a community. There are a bunch of things he's done, but that to me is kind of his best attempt at creating meaning beyond the selfish gene, beyond the explanation of how the evolutionary processes work to create us, etc. What's interesting, however, is that it was all fine and intellectual and cerebral because of the recent culture wars and cancel culture that's happening in the last few months. He has come out and said that this is interesting, I'm culturally a Christian.
What? Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't. Oh, really?
This is Richard Dawkins. Right.
Whoa.
So he's not saying he's an atheist. He has written a book called Power
Yeah.
of Delusion. So if anybody with bona fide credentials of being an atheist, Richard Dawkins would be head of that.
Yes, he'd be the
Right.
president of that
So what's
group.
interesting is that, and why? Because he found himself at the tail end of trying to defend all sorts of behaviors and all sorts of activities that were so far from the civilizational norms and spiritual health of human beings and what makes sense, right? That he could not defend it just using his scientific frameworks anymore, right? So he had to come back and
That's
fall back on some frameworks that allowed him to have a moral explanation of some certain things. And
yep.
for him, obviously, that was Christianity. He's in a Western civilization. And he therefore said, I am culturally a Christian, because that allowed him to push back against the ideological irrationality of some of the extreme left, right? That is happening right now, which is quote unquote secular, right?
Right.
So he couldn't say, because he's been very good at the dogma of the right, about people who have been dogmatically trying to have a naive and literalist view of God in Christianity. He's been a critic of that for 30 years, so that's not news. But what's interesting is that when he had to fight against the secular ideologues, this is where he landed.
That
Now,
is really, thank you for that. That's
and
incredible.
it gets interesting. I'll leave you with the last coda on that thing. So Jordan Peterson reaches out to him and says, you're the last rational being standing in the tradition that you come from.
Yep.
Let's have a talk.
Yeah,
Let's
I
have a talk.
actually heard him talk about Dawkins recently and said exactly that. And he also described in detail, in his opinion, the places Dawkins refuses to go. Like he said he got to a certain point. He even created the whole concept of meme. And then he said he looked over the edge and said, I'm not going over there. Meaning that he would have to end up in the meaning world.
Yeah.
Right. And he refused. I can't go there. Right. So,
Yeah.
but
Just
now
because
here he is.
more than I think where this conversation might lead, I'm curious about. But all I'm saying is, from the conversation we are having, it points to a human need for meaning making, and you can't escape it.
Absolutely. Well, I also think the other really important piece here is that, and I think Peterson's so right about this, it's amazing, that all of these movements, like the postmodernists, it's a religious movement,
Yeah.
but it's ideological. So it's missing parts, and that's why it's so dysfunctional. But even scientism is a religious, fanatical, blind, utopian vision sort of construct as well. So you have all the materialism too. Yeah, exactly. So interesting. Wow.
Let's go on. Final comments on today's sessions. Any observations on the two sessions we went through? Cam?
Well, I'll go back to the blank slates, the two blank slates that I tried to start with, and say I understand intelligence as information plus a list of viable options associated with the information. So there's a fact or an accurate description of reality, and coupled with that, that's information. And then if you can couple that with possible actions, viable, that's what viable means for the body, including the mind associated with the body, then that's intelligent. So it's intelligible to me. This experience of reality right now feels highly intelligible, which suggests, according to that scheme, that I've got a lot of options to move. And that is in no small part, by the grace of your attention on me.
What was that last part?
It's by grace of your attention on me. Without the careful attention that you are offering, that intelligibility is diminished. That is the subjective experience over here. So then I don't know where that goes, because Vervaeke's saying that both of those were wrong, that it's not expressionist, that was the romantic, it's not coming in out onto exactly, and it's not exactly just coming out in. I think he gets into the relational, but he didn't spend much time on it in these episodes. So I wanted to say that, and then I also just wanted to point out that there is something really right about that thing that I think it was Hegel was saying about the way to understand where life is going, I guess I'll say, is to study history. And that's exactly what the three of us are doing here. Like we're spending, just in those last few moments, I'm thinking, I'm really meticulously, with your help, trying to recognize these names and associate meaning with them to help understand how did I get to this moment of intelligibility.
Mm-hmm. Or even the frameworks in which we all live by are being outlined by Vervaeke in this course, which I think is really incredible.
Explicitly, yeah, he's doing.
Yeah, I mean,
we haven't arrived at any of them yet. Let me remind you.
Okay, so this is just the setup.
This is just a tour through history of ideas.
Wow.
No, I'm just trying to point that out because this is a setup. Go ahead, Michael.
Oh no, it's I'm good. I mean, it's just very very interesting process that we're going through here. Because we're all spending quite a bit of time on this too, ultimately, which I think is worth. I think it's totally worth it, because I still am seeing a continual shift of improvement in my existence due to our meetings and our focus on this material. It's definitely helpful. So
my observations are, we are going through the heavy historical stuff right now. And as I was looking ahead, the next two chapters are where the turning point is, at least going from the historical review, according to John Vervaeke, to his personal perspective. And the next chapter or next episode is called The Clash, where I think all the things come to a head, so to speak. And then the chapter after that is called Cognitive Science. And that's where, like, he starts laying the groundwork of modern view of sense making according to him, right? So I think we can hopefully treat chapters up to the next one as bedrock before we get to his sense making mechanisms and his work, and that would get exciting and perhaps even more difficult, but that's what it is.
Okay. Wow. That's exciting. We kind of we're almost halfway through. So that's also a trip too.
Yeah. So I'm going to call it a day today.
Okay.